And with that, we're going to get started. We have some welcome remarks from the World Bank and Pact leadership to kick off today's event.
Good morning and good afternoon. I am Dimitrios Papathanasiou. I'm the World Bank's Global Director for the Energy and Extractives Global Practice, and I would like to welcome you to the launch of our 2020 Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining State Report. Artisanal and small-scale mining is the vital livelihood of 44 million people in over 80 countries around the world. Artisanal miners produce a significant portion of the world's minerals and gemstones under difficult and sometimes dangerous working conditions. However, the true impact of their labor is not well known because we don't have good data on their work and their lives. This has an impact on the sector's development and often perpetuates a narrative that small-scale mining is inherently dangerous. It is hurtful for people's lives and for the environment. Since 2016, the World Bank has partnered with Pact through our EGPS Trust Fund, and we created a platform called Delve where we collect data to shine a light on this vital sector's contribution to global economic development. An important part of that work is the state of the artisanal and small-scale mining sector report that we are launching today. This year's report examines the contribution of artisanal and small-scale mining in the Sustainable Development Goal 8, the inclusive and sustainable economic growth with full and productive employment and decent work for all. With 80 to 90% of artisanal and small-scale mining being essentially informal and in unsafe conditions, this past year has seen even further difficulties because of COVID-19 pandemic. Today, the commitment of governments and companies that are active in the sector to help artisanal and small miners become formalized and improve their occupational health standards is more important than ever. We believe that holistic approaches that improve the working conditions can serve as a platform to scale up the critical agenda of the sector's formalization that will boost inclusive growth and create good jobs and poverty reduction. The World Bank supports the formalization of artisanal and small-scale mining and is committed to seeing the sector improve work practices, social protection measures, and fair labor standards for its workers. We believe that if prioritized, the solutions to integrate decent work into the ASM sector can be straightforward, affordable, and highly effective at improving the daily lives of miners, their families, and communities, but equally improve the balance sheet of mining companies and the revenues in many developing countries. As part of our support to artisanal and small-scale mining, the World Bank, through the EGPS Trust Fund, created an emergency response facility to help them with better coping with COVID-19 related impacts. This emergency response has supported over 26 COVID programs in more than 20 countries around the world. Right now, we're launching a third round calling for expressions to improve things for small-scale miners. I would like to thank you and your organizations for the strong support on this rapid response facility, and I would like again to welcome you in the launch of our 2020 State of the Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining Report. Thank you very much.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us virtually. My name is Caroline Anstey. I am President and CEO of Pact, International Development Organization empowering communities around the world to build solutions to development challenges. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the launch of the 2020 State of the Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining Sector Report. I'm thrilled to see the 2020 report build on the partnership between the World Bank's Extractives Global Programmatic Support Trust Fund and Pact to develop Delve, the first global database for artisanal and small-scale mining, to see how this partnership has grown to include such a diverse array of contributing institutions and organizations. A testament to this is the many organizations that have contributed case studies and analyses to this year's report, which focuses on the critical theme of decent work and economic growth under Sustainable Development Goal 8. Today's report also builds off the foundation established in the 2019 State of the ASM Sector Report, which explored the origins, impact, and extent of the vast data gap facing the ASM sector. The 2020 report puts the sector and these data gaps even further on the global development agenda through its careful analysis of occupational health and safety, economic growth, gender participation, and child labor, among other topics under the SDG 8 umbrella. The 2020 report brings solutions to light through its analyses and collections of case studies, which demonstrate a range of practical approaches and innovative models to integrate decent work into the ASM sector. These approaches and these models are possible, affordable, and highly effective at improving the daily lives of miners, their families, and their communities. One of the most compelling examples is in the area of occupational health and safety. For the first time, the report benchmarks the safety record of the ASM sector against large-scale mining and other industries. Through committed action, partnership, and investment, we have seen dramatic improvement in occupational health and safety in large-scale mining over the past 40 years. But the same cannot be said for ASM. This report challenges us to consider the collective responsibility that governments, national associations, civil society, international organizations, the private sector, and consumer, in short, all of us, have to improve health and safety for the nearly 45 million women and men who work directly in the ASM sector globally. The report demonstrates how improvements to health and safety for ASM are feasible and can provide immediate impacts to the daily lives of miners, their families, and communities. As Pact, we are grateful to you for joining this important conversation and discussing the latest data and information that demonstrate how decent work can be achieved in the ASM sector. We hope that this event and this report will inspire new action, new collaboration, new learning among all participants beyond today's launch as we seek to strengthen the ASM sector for all those who rely on it, and to make 2021 the year of occupational health and safety for artisanal and small-scale miners around the world. Thank you very much.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Daniel Franks, and I'm a professor here at the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland in Australia, where I lead the Development Minerals program. It's my privilege to co-host today's Asia, Australia, Pacific regional launch of the 2020 State of the Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining Sector report. I'm joined by Dr. Rachel Perks, the Senior Mining Specialist at the World Bank, and Dr. James McQuilkin, Program Officer for Pact, who are the managing editors of the 2020 report. We wanted to start today's event with a conversation framing the 2020 report to provide some more background information about DELV and this second annual State of the ASM Sector report. So to begin, Rachel, could you please tell us more about how DELV began and a little bit about its aims and its link to the annual State of the Sector report?
Great, thanks so much, Daniel. It's so nice to have you hosting for us today. Thank you again, and hello to everyone who's online. Dimitrios gave a bit of background. I mean, this really emerged as a conversation between a group of organizations who were keen on seeing us really be able to close some quite significant data gaps we were facing in the sector. And in particular, knowing that many organizations were doing very frontline research into the sector, we knew the data was there. It was a question of how to mobilize the crowdsourcing, the sharing of that data. And that was really the origin, of the initiative and of the platform. But because our project's key aim is really to shed light on ASM's contribution to global development, we also felt we wanted to capture that quite succinctly in an annual report. And so the idea emerged of having a state of the sector report, which would narrow in and focus on one of the SDGs every year, because this is really the key conversation, the key discourse around international development is framed around, meeting and attaining the SDGs. So this was really sort of the origin of the project for us, and more importantly, the origin of this report and where we are, today. Thanks, Daniel.
So as we've heard, the theme of this year's report is analysing ASM's contribution to SDG 8. SDG 8 is to promote sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work for all, commonly known as a decent work SDG. Can you talk me through why you chose to focus on SDG 8?
Yeah, I think on a very simple level, SDG 8 is the most tangible sort of human expression of artisanal mining. It really puts people at the center of the activity. You reflect on the ways in which people work. You look at their contribution not only to mine site production, but you can track it up to national statistics. You unfortunately look at some of the difficult issues such as child labor or mercury use, but you can also, celebrate, but also further push us to look at issues around gender equality. And so we felt it was one that really captured a lot of the key burning issues that the sector continues to face when we talk about improving the sector for the people that work in it and their communities. I think also, we've noted over the years the tremendous sort of progress we've made when it comes to certain topics such as conflict-free minerals, for instance, and the power that global alliances have brought to bear on the challenges related to it. And we wanted to bring that same enthusiasm and perspective of global alliance now to some of these more very basic, often overlooked questions of how people are working at sites, and to call upon us as a global community to reinvigorate or recommit ourselves to that fundamental agenda. And so the idea of the report is to not make opinions on what is happening, but rather to celebrate good practice and to use these case studies as a mobilizing force for all of us to improve the work we're doing, to seek out new partnerships, to learn from each other. And that's really sort of embedded in this call for this year, that we want OHS really to be the cornerstone of 2021 as we think about advancing the formalization agenda. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm going to bring James McQuilkin in now to the conversation. James is joining from London, but he's looking very sharp for that hour in the morning. I encourage everyone to download the report. There's a lot in there. There's heaps of case studies. It's a pretty tremendous achievement to bring together so much information from so many contributors, lots of different institutions and organizations. James, can you share with us a little bit about that process, how you pulled it together, the diversity of the case studies, how the report is organized?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Daniel, and Rachel too, for that background there. So basically, once it became clear that we settled on SDG 8, and that was to be the focus of the 2020 report, we published an open call for case studies, seeking out, to the global artisanal and small-scale mining community, really. And beginning in 2019, actually in October 2019, the call was made through a range of public forums, including the IGF annual general meeting, as well as various communication channels. And then our interested contributors were asked to really complete just a short online form before then participating in an online presentation where we presented this idea of focusing on SDG 8 and also the process where the Delve team would help through various rounds of revisions to develop a case study. And as you can see the slide here, you know, the immediate response was great, and just a testament, I think, to the interest and willingness from the global ASM community to share some of these lessons and work together around this shared vision of SDG 8 and the decent work agenda. So in terms of that process, we worked really hard to ensure that we had a good geographical spread. So it really is a truly global report and really reflect the range of stakeholders. So in total, there's actually 22 case studies with contributions from 59 experts representing over 30 organizations. And as you can see from the slide, the contributions were from, you know, international bodies such as the International Labour Organization, United Nations Development and Environment Programs, and the OECD, as well as multiple international and national NGOs, which I think is really key, mining associations, and development organizations working with directly with ASM communities and miners, helping to bring their voice out in the report too. We also had private sector organizations, De Beers and Trafigura being parts of case studies. And finally, last but not least, you know, a range of technical institutions and multiple universities, including your own. But yeah, the 2020 report really represents a cross-section, we think, of the ASM development community. And then finally, to your question about how it's organized. Well, essentially, we took SDG 8 and we broke it down. When I say we, the Delve team, we kind of got together and we broke it down into 5 focus areas, along with the corresponding targets and indicators as per SDG 8. And as you can see on the slide here, these 5 focus areas were as follows: improve occupational health and safety, stimulate economic growth. Number 3, make production sustainable and eliminate mercury. 4, ensure gender equality. And finally, 5, to eradicate child labour and promote youth employment. So when you go to the report, you download it online, you'll see that structure reflected throughout, and each of the case studies spoke to a different kind of sub part of SDG 8 there. So yeah, thank you. Back to you, Daniel.
Thanks, James. It's pretty exciting to see all of these case studies in the one spot, releasing it to a global audience and then kind of trying to shape the conversation as well. Can you share with me what you think the significance of an annual ASM State of the Sector report is for your institutions? How does it address some of those pressing needs of the sector, particularly with regard to this SDG 8?
Sure, I can go first, Daniel. So really, I think 3 levels. I mean, personally, for me, having lived and breathed this report, I think James has lived and breathed it more than me, but still feeling like I've lived and breathed it a lot over the last, you know, year and a bit. You know, it really actually gave me a renewed sense of energy, optimism, and hope about the sector, because, you know, so many of us that I see online today and those that were joining us earlier for the other launch, we've been working on the questions of formalization for decades now. And sometimes when you're really in the weeds, you know, you feel like things are not progressing very well. And this really was an opportunity to take stock of that. And I found it personally a very encouraging experience to read through these case studies, because they're very practical, tangible ways that organizations are working hand in hand to deal with some of the most challenging problems that the sector faces. I mean, obviously, then the second point is that the bank is fully committed to formalization. You heard our global director again reiterating that, and this is hopefully going to inspire, you know, other colleagues in my department, other colleagues across other sectors of the World Bank, just again with a renewed sense of pathways and ways to do things differently and perhaps better. And thirdly, I think this was a very important report for us because of one of our colleagues who passed away, you know, in the fall of 2020 as a result or in relation to COVID. That would be Dylan McFarland. He worked on one of the most innovating aspects, I think, of what the report is drawing out, which is this benchmarking that Caroline mentioned around ASM, health and safety, and particularly fatality rates compared to large industrial scale mining. Originally, we had this section on OHS as our last section. Following, you know, the passing of Dylan, we brought it up to the forefront and really wanted to use, you know, this is an opportunity to pay tribute to his work, his commitment to the sector over the years, and really to carry that mantle for the next year with real intention. And so that was for me a very personal perspective to the report this year. And I know that James and Nate feel the same as well. Thanks, Daniel.
It's a very fitting tribute to Dylan's work. And for those that are watching today, I encourage you to read that section of the report. It's really actually fascinating analysis. It's great to have it in there. James, did you want to share kind of your reflections?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, I mean, totally echo what Rachel's saying there. And I think, you know, again, to me personally, that focus on OHS is really important and a fitting tribute to Dylan. But I think as a whole, the report really represents a kind of collective voice really for the global ASM community as I see it, and a future vision for the ASM sector to some extent in regard to SDG 8. It really seems to provide a clear mandate to advance the decent work agenda and economic growth. And I think that the process of creating the report was also a collective process, and that's that process in and of itself kind of speaks to the way that different organizations in this space can really work together on a shared issue. And then second, in terms of, I guess, significance to Pact, well, I think in terms of our mining programs, but also our global health portfolio that we have, you know, we see the report as being immensely valuable to learn from and be able to connect with our peers and our partners working in this space, you know, and build a kind of platform for future work. And that nexus there of occupational health and mining is, ASM rather, is potentially a new entry point that's yet to be explored to its full potential. So in that regard, really, we see that the 2020 report is providing clear call to action, setting an agenda there on OHS, and one that we, you know, seek to engage with even more directly going forward in all our work. Thank you.
So at the University of Queensland, we're really proud to be co-hosting this ASM State of the Sector launch. We have contributed to both of the 2019 and 2020 reports, and from our perspective, it's as many of you might know, I work a lot in what we call development minerals sector. So here we're talking about the local materials used in local development, sand, gravel, clay, aggregate, salt, limestone. This is kind of a neglected part of a neglected sector. So it's great to see this report actually engage in that part of the ASM sector. So we're talking about quarrying, we're talking about domestic production of construction materials, etc. So really great to see that side of things. Also, when I read this report, I think that in 2018 we held the International Conference at Artisanal and Small Scale Mining that the World Bank was an important partner of. It was an initiative of the ACP EU Development Minerals Program, had lots of collaborations from UNDP and EU and Africa Union, etc. And an outcome of that was the Mosi-oa-Tunya Declaration. I see a lot of the themes that came up in the Mosi-oa-Tunya Declaration play out in this State of the Sector report. So it's really great to be seeing that the discourse that was generated by miners, so essentially that declaration was driven by the artisanal small-scale miners themselves. It was the largest gathering, international gathering of artisanal small-scale miners. Now to see that flow through this report means that agenda is, yeah, like James, you mentioned, really is seeing those visions of small-scale mining come through. And the final thing I wanted to mention is that as an extension of DELV, the World Bank and the University of Queensland partnering with this Association of Women in Mining in Africa, UNDP and the OECD to develop the DELV Exchange, which is a new network for artisanal small-scale miners by artisanal small-scale miners. So UQ is there to support artisanal small-scale mining associations to develop this network. It'll be launched next month, and it really is an opportunity for associations to develop connections with each other. And the DELV Exchange sort of builds on this big platform that DELV database and the ASM and the State of the Sector reports have established. So it's significant for me to see that the agenda is growing, right, which is exciting. Okay, well, thank you, James. Thank you, Rachel, for joining this conversation. I'm now going to hand back over to Nate, who will introduce you to the report contributors.
Thanks so much, Daniel.
All right. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to everyone that's here with us. We did want to do a special kind of recognition to the number of case study contributors that James referred to, the number of 58, I believe, across 22 different case studies that represent different geographies all around the world. And so as they weren't all able to be here on this call, we wanted to kind of recognize them. We've put together a series of compilation videos asking them, what does decent work in ASM look like to you? And so here's one of the videos. We have another one, a fuller length video with all contributors on the Delve website where you can see that. But we'll just share this short abbreviated one with you now.
My name is Pendo Mbele. I'm a mineral processing engineer from Tanzania. I work as a consultant for ASM sector. In this ASM sector, the work is performed in a condition of freedom. People are working freely. They are working with equality. There is gender equality between men and men. They are all performed in ASM sector. From Tanzania, I work as a consultant for ASM sector. In this ASM sector, the work is performed in a condition of freedom. People are working freely. They are working with equality. There is gender equality between men and men. They are all performed in ASM sector. They are working. They are following safety protocols. So they are following safety issues. They are working also in a condition of human dignity, and there is free from child labor. There's no children who are working in this area. According to me, that is what I call decent work here in Tanzania. Thank you.
Decent ASM can be small, it can be rustic, it can be relatively unsophisticated, but in our experience, it should always be legal. It should be formal, and it should be sufficiently profitable to generate a decent livelihood for the miner, his family, and people who work with him, and also to mitigate the environmental effects of the mining itself.
What does decent work look like in artisanal scale mining? Well, I think there are three aspects to this. It should be safe, valued, and equitable. Firstly, safe. It should be safe from the dangers of underground mining and also the effects of things like mercury and cyanide used for the recovery of gold. It should be valued, and I think it should be valued as a livelihood for communities and recognised and formalised by the government. And equitable, I think the benefits of small-scale mining should be shared equally and fairly between miners, communities and the government.
Health and safety is the most crucial aspect of decent work in ASM. Without a doubt, the most important thing is that the people working in the sector are given the skills, knowledge, and resources needed to effectively manage the risks associated with their jobs, and ultimately return home to their families in good health.
Decent work in ASM means miners receiving their fair share. Miners would work in a safe and rights-abiding environment. And the benefits for mining don't just go to miners, but also to surrounding communities. And of course, once the mining is finished, that land would be returned to its original state, or one that is viable for other economic activities like agriculture or fishing.
Ang minang bayan ay walang child labor, walang mercury. Dito ay patas yung sahod ng mga manggagawa at ito ay legal dahil tayo ay piproteksyonan ng ating gobyerno dahil yung ating minang bayan ito ay rehistrado sa ating gobyerno.
Super. Thank you again to all of our contributors that made this 2020 report possible. Please do check out the extended version of that video on the report website. We'll post the link in the chat later in the call here. I wanted to transition here. We're going to have a little interactive session with everyone. We wanted to communicate some of the key messages of the State of the Sector report in this myth versus fact style approach. And so we're going to poll you all to see if you think the statements we present are myths or facts, and then we'll share a little bit more about those and hear from some of the report contributing authors speaking to their case studies and how they align to that theme and some of the key messages you can find in the report. So with that, I'll hand it over to James and we'll start our first poll.
Brilliant, thank you, Nathan. And just to note as well, obviously we have the Q&A question answer session at the end. So if there are questions coming to you as we're going through these and as some of the contributors are speaking, please put them in the chat and we will come to them towards the end. So our first myth or fact is artisanal and small-scale mining has always been more dangerous than large-scale mining. ASM has always been more dangerous than large-scale mining. So you should see on your screen now a little pop-up where you can vote as to whether this is a myth or a fact. And at the moment, we have about 24% of people voted. We'll give a few more seconds. We'll give you about 30 seconds. So ASM has always been more dangerous than large-scale mining. We're almost up to half the number of people. You should just be able to click it on your screen. But it's looking like about 76% of you are saying that this is a myth. So yes, at the end of the poll there, 77% of people think that this statement is a myth. So Nathan, can we reveal how it is? So you're correct. Most of you are correct there. It's a myth. The world's large-scale mining industry was once actually as unsafe as artisanal small-scale mining. And this myth really, speaks to those the work and the message around OHS that we've worked on in the report. So let me tell you a bit more about the data behind this statement. So in the first case study of the Dell report on occupational health and safety, we present the fatality frequency rate model for ASM and then compare it to published data on large-scale mining. And just to be clear, the fatality frequency rate, or FFR, is the number of fatalities per 1 million hours worked. And it's a common measure used, especially in the large-scale mining sector, but one that's been rarely applied or rarely calculated for ASM. And so, as you can imagine, while the data is relatively easy to track down for large-scale mining, and you can see on the graph here, there is even data going all the way back to the 1920s, as ever, for the small-scale mining sector, it really doesn't exist. So instead, our late colleague, Dylan, who really was a true advocate for mine safety in ASM, well, he'd been collecting a record of all the ASM incidents and disasters reported in the media over the last couple of years in an offline Excel file and pulling it from media reports online. And using that information for triangulation, along with some data that was published by the ILO in 1999, which was actually drawn from a survey of national government officials where the ILO surveyed them and asked government officials to estimate the number of deaths in small-scale mining per year. Dylan developed a model to calculate the FFR for ASM. So as you see in the slide here, this is the results and this is the comparison. So with some of that data, we were able to say that in the 1970s, industrial coal mining in the USA had a fatality frequency rate of 0.54. This compares to South African gold mining in the 1980s, which had an FFR of 0.63. And in 1999, using that ILO data, we estimate an FFR of 0.52. So as such, we can say that the ASM sector actually had similar fatality rates in 1999 as the USA's and South Africa's large-scale mining industries did in the 1970s and 80s. So essentially, there was a point in time, really not that long ago at all, when it was actually acceptable for large-scale mining to be as dangerous as ASM can be today. And by triangulating with the Delve estimate for the total number of people working in ASM in 2020, you can see this 30,000 fatalities per year figure on the right-hand side of the graph. So actually, by taking that 0.5 rate and using the 42 million people or 44 million people that are estimated by Delve to be working in ASM based on the data in the database, we triangulate that number and it comes to about 30,000 fatalities a year, which is a sobering but actually not unlikely number. So we can say that this rate is probably still accurate or relevant at least for today, even though it's based on some data from 1999, which is the best available. And then also the other point to note here is that For the large-scale mining industry, we see a big downward trend from left to right from 1920 to 2020. And that last point highlighted there of 0.04 is from the International Council on Mining and Metals, which shows the dramatic improvements down to near zero, reporting a fatality rate today. Next slide, please, Nathan. So in the report, and now, we posit the question, how has the large-scale mining industry improved? And therefore, what lessons can be learned for ASM? Well, aside from increasing mechanization, which has obviously led to some safety improvements and just actually reduced the number of people working in mines, frankly, I think it's also become unacceptable in wider society for large-scale mining to be such a dangerous and risky occupation. And in the report, we note how this has led to significant investment from governments and mining companies over the past 40 years. Take, for example, the US Department of Labor Mine and Safety, Health and Administration Department, which was set up in 1977. And today they actually hold quarterly training calls, which are all recorded online. You can access them online now. They provide support and advice, and people dial in from across the US to hear these. And they have an annual budget of $376 million. So we ask in the report, what if we applied the same approach, or even a fraction of that level of investment, support and funding in ASM? Could perhaps the same achievements in decent work that have occurred in large-scale mining over the past 40 years also be achieved in ASM? Next slide, please, Nathan. So with this overview and this data analysis, in this what is the first focus area of the report on OHS, it's accompanied by 3 in-depth case studies, looking at small-scale mining in Rwanda, in terms of including health and safety, looking at the data I've just presented there, and also looking at Matoshi Cobalt Mine in DRC. And so building off these 3 case studies, and again, I encourage you to go and download them. If we jump to the next slide, we make reflections for the entire report. And the main reflection connected to this particular focus area of the report is that investment is urgently needed, given that occupational health and safety, ASM, as we demonstrate, is both a collective responsibility, which is feasible and beneficial to all. And we also provide some actions there, as you can see on the slide on the right, of how this can be achieved. And these are elaborated on in the report further. So that's our first myth or fact there, on that key message of improving occupational health and safety. I'll turn it back to you, Nate, for another myth or fact. So please, fingers at the ready to vote as well. Thanks.
Super, thanks, James. So we're going to present our second myth or fact here. It's at its peak in 2012, ASM contributed to 17% of the national GDP for Guyana. We are going to launch the poll now. So if you think this is a myth or fact, have a go in the poll, and we'll give a few seconds for folks to get some of those responses in and see where the consensus lies. All right, I'm going to end the poll there and just share with everyone. It seems like about 90% of you think it's a fact, and 90% of you are correct. This is a fact, and how we know this is in the case of Guyana, nearly all the gold produced between 1996 and 2015 came from indigenous small-scale miners. So its contribution to the economic development in the sector could be quantified when you look at exports and national production. Really stimulating economic growth is one of the key components to Sustainable Development Goal 8, and there are a few examples of other studies that provide some indications of ASM's contribution to economic growth, but these are more often the exception than commonplace. We know in Rwanda, similarly like the case in Guyana, the majority of mining is classified as small scale based on the size of investment. And so the sector itself has been reported to contribute 2.5% of the GDP in 2018, making it one of the country's top exporters. And then in Uganda, though not at a formal statistic, a 2018 study estimated that if ASM gold and clay production were included in the formal sector, it could increase GDP by 5%. So from these limited examples, and also from, anecdotally, we know ASM is an engine for local development in many rural contexts, but in terms of qualitative data that really demonstrates ASM's contribution and speaks to policymakers of its importance, we don't have that. And so the sector's importance is often under-recognized and not considered as widely in the SDG 8 decent work agenda. But in the 2018 report, or sorry, the 2020 report, we do make the case that data underscores this economic importance through a series of case studies that demonstrate that the understanding of economic data for ASM really creates this understanding of how finances are fueling the sector's production and growth, creating linkages to other sectors or industries. And then also really this economic data can bolster the case for formalization. We have 5 case studies on economic growth in the 2020 report, and they go a long way, we think, to filling this economic data gap by highlighting a number of the formalization strategies that are being taken place in different parts around the world. They also show, despite the complexities and challenges in each of these contexts, better economic data really helps us gain an understanding of the functioning of ASM markets and the different labor dynamics that are at play and how the sector can be harnessed to be this engine for economic growth and development that it can to fulfill the SDG 8 agenda. So with that, I want to pause and bring in 2 of our case study authors who I think are joining us now to share a little bit more about their case studies. And so I think I see Dr. Lingfei Wang from Chongqing University. Dr. Wang, in your case study, you explored the labor dynamics for Chinese artisanal miners in local communities in Cameroon. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about your case study, talk about the dynamics between small-scale miners, in Cameroon, where there are these foreign actors, and what's the relevance for policymakers when they think about the sector and its contribution to economic development?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity for me to participate in the launch event of our case report. So in this report, our contribution is to write the labor dynamics of the Chinese artisanal miners and small-scale miner in Cameroon. So I'm going to focus on our case to talk a little bit about this scenario and also respond to the Rachel's question. So in Cameroon, artisanal and small-scale mining has existed actually since at least the 19th century. So most of the artisanal miners engaged in the extraction of the gold and diamonds. But in this case, we focus on the gold mining in the eastern Cameroon, where is the gold-rich area in Cameroon. For my study, the first foreign small-scale miner was established in Betaruya, where is our research area, was in 2016. But actually, the first gold miner from the foreign countries was the Korean. But the second year in 2007, the first Chinese company came and settled down here because they have this like a connection with their relatives and their friends in domestic China. So by introduction, more and more Chinese miners came from domestic China. Mostly they are farmers in the villages. So subsequently, there are most Chinese communities located in Eastern Cameroon. During our field investigation of the past years, we found the formalization of the ASM was complicated by the arrival of the artisanal miners from the foreign countries, for example, from China. First, the dilemma of the ASM formalization was intensified in Cameroon because the foreigners came here and they have to rent the artisanal mining permit from the local Cameroonians because they were not allowed to work under the artisanal mining permit. So they have to rent from the local miners. There is kind of a loophole between the local people working, local artisanal miners, and the foreign miners working under the same mining permits. So for our understanding, the dilemma of this formalization was complicated. And as a result, elites captured enabled by the artisanal miners was also existed. As we can see, most of these benefits flew to the foreign miners, because they work more mechanized, they have some like larger amount of capitals and more organized. And also the government could get some tax from these foreign mining activities. The local people only could get a very, very tiny benefit from the artisanal mining permits. And the third, poverty alleviation was unfulfilled, and also environmental concerns intensified, because when we went to the field, many and most of the local communities complained their rivers, their soil was polluted, because these companies, these miners will wash the gold along their river, which they will rely on their lives on the river. So in general, we think the lack of the coordination of the integration among the government agencies, mining companies, and the local communities contributes to the tensions and conflicts. So harmonizing the mining policies and resource governance strategies in Cameroon should be a priority. But the first step before we to work on the policies or resource governance, the first step should be to clarify the legislative framework to legalize the small-scale mining, and especially to clarify the mining permits, who could or who are able to extract gold here to fill the gap between the local artisanal miners and foreign miners. So effective implementation of the legislation is needed to ensure more effective governance of this activity. So these above are all the conclusions or the findings based on our field studies we have done a couple of years ago. And I think, and another point.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think we'll have some more time in the question and answer session, but I want to make sure we have time for others to share here for the couple more case study authors. Yeah. Thank you for that. I think there's a really unique situation happening there, and your exploration of it and the case study reveals a lot of interesting dynamics at play. I want to just shift to bring in Gary Lee. If Gary, you're still with us, I know you had some connection.
Hey Nathan, yeah, I can. It's cutting in and out, but so I'll leave my video off. But hopefully everyone can hear me.
Super, we can hear you, Gary. Gary, thank you so much for joining us. Just as a way of background, Gary works as a geotechnical advisor for Pacific Community based in Fiji, and he co-authored a study that stands out from the majority of the case studies in that it focuses on the development minerals, as Daniel mentioned, in Fiji, so looking at sand, gravel, and crushed aggregate mining. Gary, I'm just wondering if you can kind of speak a little bit to some of the findings from this baseline assessment of development minerals in Fiji, and what were some of the insights that were generated around the state of the sector there and its economic contributions to Fiji, and how does that play out for influence kind of policymakers or thinking around recommendations for managing the sector and managing environmental impacts, as well as supporting national development. So Gary, the floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, so as Daniel Franks and Nathan have alluded to earlier, that development minerals, this is talking about the range of minerals which are extracted, processed, and then used domestically. So they're important, particularly important for domestic development. So yeah, in the Fiji context, development mineral sector predominantly consists of construction aggregates, so it's like sand, gravel, crushed rock used for infrastructure, and it's overwhelmingly small-scale operators and locally owned operators. So development minerals, they play a critical role in infrastructure development in Fiji, particularly development of resilient infrastructure, which is resilient to natural hazards such as the annual cyclone season we have in Fiji, where corrugated iron structures are relatively vulnerable, whereas concrete structures using development minerals are relatively resilient. So the study found annually about 3.6 million cubic meters of development minerals are extracted each year, which is about 6.5 tons per capita. So clearly this is a critical resource which is readily consumed by society. Now, about one of the major findings was approximately 2/3 of this 3.6 million cubic meters is being extracted from Fiji's rivers. Now, there was numerous environmental and social issues associated with river gravel extraction, which were identified. This is largely linked to the types of rivers in Fiji, which are perennial, so they're always wet and meandering rivers. So whereby most of the gravel deposits are confined to the active channel. And then also when you look at the social context of the communities living around these rivers, which depend on the rivers for a variety of subsistence functions. So just some of the issues which were identified were related to like water quality, the communities using this water for drinking, for bathing, for cleaning, depletion of fisheries, it's an important source of protein for communities, food source, erosion, loss of land, damage to infrastructure on the rivers such as bridges, and then also conflict with other competing land use practices such as tourism. But yeah, ultimately there's very limited scope for rehabilitating the river gravel extraction sites. But whereas in contrast, the hard rock quarries were found to have relatively moderate impacts and isolated impacts, and generally better outcomes with the communities. And they also have effective scope for rehabilitation into productive assets beyond the extraction phase of the quarry. For example, there's a marina and then an eco resort which have been developed in quarries in Fiji. So in relation to this, one of the main recommendations is for Fiji to develop a plan to transition away from river gravel extraction to a network of quarries in strategic locations. Now, obviously, with 2/3 of the material currently coming out of the rivers, this will take time and it'll require collaboration between a broad range of stakeholders. So it won't be easy, but it's important for long-term sustainable development in Fiji. Thanks, Nathan.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Dr. Wang, for sharing those kind of insights into some of the case studies that you'll find in the 2020 report. Just to wrap up this section on economic growth, the report makes this recommendation really focusing on the need for better data on ASM's economic contribution, looking at national statistics offices as one avenue really to prove, for the value of the sector towards national and global growth, and provides a number of actions that are elaborated on in the report of how this can be realized. So to keep us moving, we're going to go on to our next myth or fact. So I'll start the poll for this one as well, but to read it out for everyone. Introducing improved mineral processing technology to ASM is only successful if the mineral recovery rates are increased to 100%. So do you think this is a myth or a fact? And so we'll give folks some time to get their votes in. Great. It seems like, again, here we've got a pretty overwhelming majority looking at 80% of the reports, 80% of the results coming in thinking this is a myth. And in fact, it is a myth as well. So the increasing recovery rates, really for miners, if they have lower recovery rates in the sector between 20 to 30%, and increasing recovery even just up to 50 to 60% really makes a significant improvement in ASM. And this is really possible through sometimes low cost, simple approaches, which can really have positive impacts on miners' lives. And as we argue in the 2020 report, there's often this perception that for interventions to be successful, they must be all encompassing or achieve kind of dramatic results for miners, but this is not always the case. Sorry, is not the case. We find that through a range of models and projects and programs, showcased in the report that these targeted interventions, even if they're in very specific but relevant areas, they can serve as platforms for holistic and progressive formalization. So there's this idea that there's multiple entry points into this formalization agenda, and if we're addressing one area, this can open the door to address a number of other issues for the broader decent work reforms when it comes to achieving greater contributions to SDG 8. We see this point really emphasized across the report, but it's very much reflected in focus area 3 of the report, where we focus on making production sustainable and eliminating mercury. And we have 4 case studies that really illustrate this point well, that while the entry point is about sustainable and environmentally friendly production, this also provides a platform for the sector to address wider issues around decent work and formalization of the ASM sector. And the report's reflection, just to reiterate here, is that these targeted interventions in relevant areas can help improve miners' lives through increasing their pay, health, and well-being across kind of a holistic formalization agenda. So with that, I'm going to shift back over to my colleague James McQuilkin to showcase us here on the 4th myth or fact.
Brilliant, thank you, Nathan. So yes, myth or fact, I should say, number 4. 60% of countries with ASM do not have published data on female participation. So Nathan, should we bring up the poll now? That's 60% of countries with artisanal small-scale mining do not have published data on female participation. And the results are coming in now. It's about getting up to almost 50% of you that have voted. Give you a few more seconds there. But yes, I think we can end the polling. 88% of you say that this is a fact. And as we go to the next slide, we shall reveal. In fact, it's 90% of you, 89%. It's true. Quite staggeringly and worryingly, 6% of countries with ASM do not have published data on female participation. And this analysis, as the next slide shows, and is featured in the report on focus area around gender equality, the analysis is based on the data that's available in the Delve platform, and which has been compiled through an extensive literature that actually began really at the start of Delve in 2019. So, I mean, if we're being precise, and just to be clear, we only have data on female participation, therefore, for 25 out of 78 countries that have employment data for the ASM sector. And looking at the map here, you can see that it's not actually confined to a particular region, but this is a global problem. There is an invisibility crisis when it comes to female participation in ASM and them being seen. And we're missing, this information from Asia, the Americas, and the African continent. And when we look, and just to note as well, some of these points here is that when we look at the limited data and we look at where it's coming from, we see that it's also very outdated, even the data we do have, with much of it over 66%, almost 70% there being data points that are more than 10 years old. So the point really here is not about the specific data points for each country, and the data in general is not fantastic. But when we take a step back as well, it's really that globally as a whole, women remain largely visible within the ASM sector. So the 2020 report tries to go some way to highlighting and also filling some of this data gap. And on focus area 4, which is ensure gender equality, we have 4 case studies, and they cover this issue in a range of different ways. And I'm actually pleased to say that we have 2 authors of 2 of the case studies on the line today. And first of all, I'd like to call on Dr. Musa Gonwe to speak to her case study. So Musa, whilst you're getting your microphone and camera ready there, the case study you wrote with the Association of Women in Mining in Africa spoke about the Awema jewelry project, that you've been running with your members, which included a survey actually on some of the data on your members to understand the role of women better, especially in the jewelry gemstone value chain. So if you'd like to speak a bit more about your case study and tell us a bit more about some of that work you've been undertaking for the next couple of minutes, that would be fantastic. Over to you, Musa. Thank you.
Thanks, James, and thank you to the Delve team and the managing editors for the opportunity to contribute to the State of the Sector report. I also want to acknowledge my authors, Zoe, who's a gemologist based in Madagascar, and Salma, who's with the Tanzanian Women in Mining Organization, for their valuable contribution to the chapter. Unfortunately, they're not able to join as the time difference with Africa right now is not fantastic for them. Before I delve into some of what the delve, pun intended, some of what the data revealed. So Association of Women in Mining in Africa is a continental body. It's a network of over 20 national mining associations. And what we sought to do with this survey is really to provide some evidence base and move away from the anecdotal information we had around, who are the women miners, who own mines, who's formalized, what are they mining, what is the quality, how are they financed, all the way to the end of the supply chain, who are the jewelers, where are they getting their supplies from, how do they get financed, and trying to build opportunities around creating shortage supply chains and retaining much value, because the value in the jewelry supply chain is at the downstream end of the supply chain. So trying to see what more beneficiation could be done within Africa across women. So if we look at some of what the data has showed us from the survey, so in terms of the survey, we had one of the questions asked women, what is your occupation in the jewelry supply chain? So we asked the question, are you a gemstone miner, a metal miner, a trader, exporter, a jewelry shop owner? And what we found is a lot of women hold more than one role. So for example, a mine owner could also be an exporter or a trader. A jewelry shop owner could also be a gem cutter. The question I wish we'd asked, and we will include that, is what else do you do besides that? Because you find women have multiple functions. They might own farms, they might be in other trades, they might be in fishing or in a chicken business. And so I think that's a question that we want to unpack further around the multiple roles and functions that women have. Specifically looking at health and safety, one of the questions we asked is, do you provide any of the following items? And almost all mine owners said they do provide some form of either a dust mask, a first aid kit, gloves, boots, or uniform. We also asked the question, what is your level of awareness of the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible mineral supply chains? For those who might not be familiar, and I'm sure there are people on the call that can speak to this in much more detail, the OECD due diligence guidance clarifies how companies can identify and better manage risks throughout the entire mineral supply chain from miners to market. And these risks are violence, child labor, torture, and contributions to conflict. This, I think, is inextricably linked to SDG 8 and women in the supply chain. African women in the supply chain might not necessarily be the ones conducting due diligence, but due diligence would be done on them. So it's important for them to understand what the process is. And out of the 80 responses to that question, we found that 56% had never heard of the guidance. We also asked the question, how can responsible sourcing be improved? Responsible sourcing, especially in the jewelry sector, is quite a trending term. It can be used and abused for marketing gimmicks, but it implies a certain relationship with a supplier. So it's important for suppliers to understand what that means. And we found quite different opinions or perceptions about this. Some people talk about increasing labor or increasing technology. That gave us an idea that from a supply side, there's not much understanding around what responsible sourcing means, but there were also sentiments around rewarding miners fairly as well as HSE. The last 2 points that I want to mention is the importance of value of working with women in mining associations. The survey we did was an online survey, and it's not easy to target miners through online surveys, but the women in mining associations were able to share it within their networks and were also to provide data about their membership. So we really appreciate the efforts of organizations like Tanzania, Zambia, Kenya, and Ghana in pushing this out as much as possible. And finally, in terms of how it's informing the work that we're doing now, we're really grateful to have received funding from the World Bank through the EGPS program to actually now create a women-led jewelry supply chain. And we're doing this in partnership with 11 sources. As part of this project, the first thing we did is we run a jewelry design competition, and we shared the opportunity with women who participated in the survey. And in fact, the person who actually won the jewelry design competition is one of the women who her first touch point with AWIMA was through this survey. Thanks, James.
Thank you so much, Dr. Musa. I think that's just an incredible and really fantastic example there, especially that final point around, actually reaching one of those members and the winners through that survey, and shows the power really of surveying members and the amount of information and data and knowledge that can be extracted and used for good in terms of ensuring gender equality. So thank you so much for sharing those findings there. And again, I urge everyone on the line to go and look at that case study. It's a fascinating one, and also look at some more work of Oema. I'd now like to also call on another case study contributor, Revere Whitney, who is a co-author of a case study from the Indonesian NGO Yayasan Ambuhak Sinta, and I believe you should be on the line. So whilst you're getting ready to speak there, I'll just highlight that your case study outlines a really practical methodology for gender mapping, and one which your team and your colleagues at YTS were able to apply to the artisanal small-scale gold mining sector in Indonesia. With the results, as you say in your case study, you then developed an innovative access to finance model with a women's gold panning collective. So perhaps you could tell us a bit more about your case study, Whitney, and especially the gender mapping methodology and how it was used to inform your project and some of those key lessons there in the next couple of minutes. So over to you now, Whitney, to give us a bit more information on your case study, and your slides are here on the screen. Thanks.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Revere Whitney. I'm with Ambuhak Sinta Foundation, OYTS from Indonesia. In 2017, we did gender mapping into project fund First Canada. We work with 3 ASM community in 3 districts in Indonesian province of Central Kalimantan. The gender mapping show us that the use of machines in SGM sectors creates gender inequality between men and women miners. In the past, the role of men and women in the SGM sector were essentially the same, as both men and women did gold panning. With the introduction of mining machines, gold mining became much more profitable for men because it dramatically increased the amount of gold they can recover and provides more job opportunity for men miners. The machine used in SGM are complex and require skill and physical strength to operate. This excluded the women who continue panning and had much more lower productivity compared to men. Women were rarely involved as they were deemed unsuitable for mechanized labor due to being perceived as less physically strong and having lower skill to operate the machinery's machine. These and other findings help us in developing our approach to the sectors. With a better understanding of the gender dimension, we see that men have greater access and control to research and job opportunities. In response, we come out with some recommendations to help women improve their situation. For instance, first, form a cooperative to get access to the capital. The second one, improve technical and management capacity to produce mercury-free gold. And the third one, connect with the ethical jewelry market to get higher price. As the follow-up of the gender mapping, YTS helped empower a group of women miners in one of the gender mapping location. As shown in our second case study, the gender equity case study, a woman group was formalized, increased their production level by using simple portable sluice boxes, and then we trained them how to produce mercury-free gold, and we trained them to have a better administration and financial management, and then we link them with ethical jewelry, so then they can make a contract work with the company in Bali who buy the gold with premium price. Initially, there were 10 women in the group, and now there are 25 women miners. The group continuously develop, increase their production capacity, and providing sustainable benefit to the group members. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think both our speakers there really show the importance and power of understanding the dynamics of gender in ASM in order to achieve decent work for all. And in fact, when it comes to the report there, this is shown, and this point is shown in reflection 6 that we make, which is that we should focus on women's work in ASM because it's essential to that goal of decent work for all. And I see some questions appearing in the chat there, so please do keep that going. And we'll come to that very shortly. We have one more myth or fact. And also just to note, obviously in this reflection number 6 you see on the slide, we also provide some very clear actions around addressing the invisibility crisis through such work as was just shared there by our contributors. So thanks again. So our final myth or fact here, myth or fact number 5, Nathan can bring the polling up in a second, is that globally there are 117 national and regional ASM associations. So is this a myth or a fact? Globally, there are 117 national and regional ASM associations. I see the votes coming in fast, and we are over half of those that have voted. Most of you are saying it's a fact. You believe there are 117 national and regional ASM associations. I think we can stop the polling there. Thank you, Nathan. So yes, 78% of you, nearly 80%, believe that worldwide, globally, there are 117 national and regional associations. Well, as the next slide shows, we can reveal that it's a myth. Actually, we don't know, but we need to. You know, we do not actually have a catalogue of national and regional ASM associations. If we were to say that there are 80 countries worldwide that we know to have ASM, based on the Delve data, and we had one, so at least one national association, then that would give 80. But you know, if you also were to then include all the women's associations, the different regional and multi-regional groups, and the different you know, non-specific ASM associations such as workers' unions that also work, we would imagine the number to be a lot higher. But the main point that we're making here is that we just don't know, but that we should do in terms so that we can work with them, and because they are really key to promoting decent work in ASM and filling this data gap. And this is shown in the Delve report, that ASM associations are valuable partners, and this is shown through, you know, many of the case studies. For example, we heard from Musa there around the AWEMA case study, but there's also involvement there of some other artisanal small-scale mining groups. And we argued that in the report, the case study showed, we argued that you know, there's extensive networks of these associations. Many of them are already engaged in advocacy with governments, and so there's the ability, as we've heard there, to, you know, engage with supporting messaging, to collect data, to undertake pilots and bigger projects, and also, you know, to leverage those existing relationships and reach of the associations. So if we go to the next slide, then you know, and in addition, really, and this comes to focus area 5 of the report, which is to eradicate child labour and create decent youth employment, where we have 4 case studies. Associations are also absolutely essential to tackling this issue of child labour, and engaging directly with miners and communities on this issue, given its kind of social background from which child labour comes from, and that we explore more in the report too, and also provide a bit more data analysis around how many children perhaps there are in ASM. And in the final part of the report as well, we have a section which is all of the reflections together as we presented today, and it's around collaborating for change. And there's a couple of case studies there, one of which focuses on this dialogue with association groups in Ghana and Tanzania. So the point we're making on this part of the report really is that concerted partnerships with small-scale associations are absolutely key to advancing the decent work agenda. And going forwards, we should work with associations and national groups much more to really engage on these issues and yeah, work through their existing networks and help empower them. So that really concludes the myth or fact section. As you can see, reflection 4 and 5 speak to those points in the report. Yeah, I will hand it back to you, Nathan. Thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed this myth or fact section. And please, again, go and see the report to read more about the reflections.
Super. Thank you, James. We're gonna just, we have one more pre-recorded video here. This is from the Vice Governor of West Nusa Tenggara province in Indonesia, and it's a regional reflection on some of the decent work themes we talked about in the report. We're going to show this clip and then we'll open up the discussion. So if you do have time to submit some questions in the chat still for us, and we'll have some time for discussion after the video here.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. On behalf of the West Nusa Tenggara government, I, Dr. Haja Siti Rohmi Jalilah, Vice Governor of the province, would like to thank you for the contributing on the regional lands of 2020 State of Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining ASM Sector Report. Our government has been proactively supporting initiatives to improve the management of ASM sector, including a collaboration with the World Bank in 2019 on a study on women empowerment in Lombok. We hope that through such studies, we are better informed the socio-economic aspects of the local ASM communities and can provide what is most urgently needed for them in the context of providing decent work and safe conditions for women. On national level, the government of Indonesia attempts to resolve some of the issues in the mining sector through the enactment of the revision of the mining law, which strengthens governance of licensing, environmental management, including mercury abolishment, and last but not least, strengthening the management of ASM. The State of the ASM Sector Report mentions that conducting target intervention to relevant issues can be one way towards achieving the same work in ASM sectors. In Indonesia, that relevant issue would include mercury abolishment. Indonesia has ratified the Minamata Convention and adopted it in the law. President Joko Widodo then signed the Prudential Regulation in 2019. And Indonesia targets to be able to have 100% mercury abolishment in 2025. This plan and target are followed by a number of concrete action by central and subnational government, such as collaborating with international research institutes to conduct studies on alternative technologies for no mercury processing. West Nusa Tenggara also established a partnership with the local mining agency and police to eradicate the use and distribution of mercury. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
So we now have time for an open question and answer session. We only have a few minutes now before we close up at 1/2 the hour. But we've had some questions come in already on the chat box. If you've got a late one to sneak in, please do so now. I had a really great question from Joe earlier asking basically how much responsibility for artisanal and small-scale mining reform should be for national governments and countries to drive versus how much should be the responsibility of external agencies and funding bodies. He observed that perhaps as the presentation today has given the view that external funding bodies are doing the heavy lifting. I wondered if we had any of our contributors that wanted to speak to that question. Musa, you're really involved in work with artisanal small-scale mining associations. Are they the ones that should be driving some of this agenda, or are they already driving this agenda?
Good question. I think there's room and there's scope for everyone to be involved. I don't think it's one thing that should be owned by any particular organization, but every actor or actress has a role to play in the formalization process. I'm wondering with Joe's comment when he says how much, is there a way that you divide up formalization to say this part is what the government should be doing and this part is what associations should be doing? I think it's a collective effort that's required by all. And I know certainly associations are doing a lot of work, engaging directly with miners around helping them to do things like get access to permits, getting them to get registered, providing them information, because peer networks are great ways to inform and to learn, but there still is a role with governments to simplify formalization processes as well. So it's a collective effort that's required by all.
Thanks, Musa. I'm going to call on you now, James. There was a question in the chat box asking about case studies on ASM LSM collaboration. Would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, I think there's a few great examples, and actually two of them that spring to mind immediately are both from the private sector. The first one is of Trafigura, the global commodity trader that in DRC at the Matoshi Cobalt mine, where they had an offtake agreement with Chemaf, this medium to large scale cobalt mining company, who have then formalized and allowed a small scale mining cooperative, Comiacol, to actually work on the concession and support them and improve their OHS to kind of meet international standards and then have that cobalt enter the international supply chain. So that's a great example and a really unique model. And I think the other one is probably GemFair, which is De Beers initiative from Sierra Leone, if I get that correct, around diamonds, where they provided a different and new finance model to pre-finance small-scale diamond miners and also improve, again, health and safety standards as part of that pre-financing agreement. So there's some really interesting models in there. And in general, a lot of the case studies have different types of formalization models. I think that was one key theme that came out there. And I urge people to kind of look at some of those models that are being tried and see how they can be replicated in your own countries and contexts. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, James. I think we've probably just about done it for time. So if you've got any answers to questions, if you're a contributor or if you feel like you can answer any of those questions, please do so in the chat box. There's a few other interesting questions in there, a pretty robust discussion. I'm now going to hand back over to Rachel, who's going to present some concluding remarks.
Thanks so much, Daniel. It's always great to be working with you. I wanted to just, I think it was Fitzim that put one of these questions in the box here about, so what next? And that was really kind of some of the closing remarks that we wanted to make today. As we said, first off, we had wanted the report to come out earlier in 2020. We had a lot of challenges with COVID, et cetera. And so here we are, in May, but we still really want to make 2021 the year of occupational health and safety. And what we mean by that, quite practically, is not only that we want to spread that message and to inspire people to look into the report and think about ways to improve their ongoing engagements, but it is to get better about reporting. So one of the most tangible examples I can think of is back to some of my early days working in Tanzania and just trying to figure out how we could develop a very simplified environmental and social impact assessment that could be used in small scale mining sites, because essentially the tools and frameworks that were being placed upon small scale miners were those that the industrial mining sector had to adhere to. And these standards were very difficult for small scale miners to be able to achieve, and was leading to a lot of difficulties in formalizing the sector. And we know that there are a lot of good tools out there now that look at these issues of whether it's simplified environmental impact and social assessments, whether it's gender baselines, whether it's approaches to mercury. There's a lot of different tools out there, and what we want to continue to do over the years is actually to continue to document and to make those available on the Dell site so that we can continue to encourage best practice. We're also going to do a series of events in regions over the year to, again, really zoom in on the OHS, and certainly within the bank's own portfolio, we have a very active portfolio of lending to governments all over the world. We have a lot of ASM formalization components in those programs, and we are doing a lot of work on these issues, and it will be, again, to sort of highlight and to reinforce a lot of the work that we're doing. And so anyone who is interested in being part of what we're calling this sort of global campaign on OHS this year, please be in touch with myself, with James, Nate, so that we can continue to brainstorm how we might really get good practice basically out into the world, and to find ways to be able to do more scaling up of the good work that is happening. So again, I want to thank everyone for being here with us today. And thank you again, especially to Daniel for hosting this through the University of Queensland. We're so appreciative of your collaboration and your partnership. Thank you to James and Nate for their leadership on this work. And most importantly, to all the contributors and those who have made this report a success, and to all of you who were able to join today. And we look forward to continuing the conversation, and most importantly, the good work that we're all doing over this year. So thank you.